Hello YouTube and welcome to what I hope will be an intermediate guide to using Groff to write professional looking documents, to write academic documents and whatnot. So this video is going to be a look into my Groff workflow and some of the custom macros that I've written to make my life a little easier. Now, I just want to preface this by saying that I'm in no way a programmer and I'm a Linux noob, but what I am is a mechanical engineering master's student, and that means I need to write a lot of reports. And I've chosen to write my reports using MS and Groff for a couple of reasons, mostly because it's just really simple and really easy to get into. Most of the stuff I'm about to show you in this video, they're not really geared towards beginners. I expect you to already know a little bit about Groff before watching this video. I'll gloss over most of the basic stuff and I'll just show you all the custom things I've done, all the changes that I've made. So first of all, this is my MS template. So this file contains all the macros, an example of all the macros that I use pretty regularly. And I'll just take you to this file because I think this does a pretty good job of showcasing all the stuff that I use. So first off the bat, we have this really amazing header with GNU and TOCs and some hyperlinks, internet hyperlinks. Clicking on the hyperlinks takes you to the browser. We've got these line separations here. Next, we come to the headings, the numbered headings. You notice that these headings are bigger than the default Groff headings. I've made a little bit of change to that. I'll show you guys later on how to increase font size and increase the vertical spacing between your lines, your paragraph lines. There's also PDF links embedded within the document. So you'll see that hovering over this text, it gives you like a sneak peek into what's on that page. At least in Evince it does. And I think most other modern PDF viewers. Clicking on it will take you to that page. We've also got equations inside paragraphs. We've got references. I usually choose to accumulate my references at the end of the document, so that's why you don't see it down here. I'll show it to you later. We also have automatically numbered equations. So you'll see that these equations are numbered according to the section that they're in. So these equations are all in subsection 2.1. So the numbering starts with 2.1.1. If they were up here, it would start with 1.1.1, or before this subheading, it would start with 1.1, 1.2, and so on. We also have an example of code. Suppose you want to print out code, how you would do that. And there's various ways of embedding images in your Groff document. So the way I've done it is I've written a macro to embed the image, automatically number it, and then give a caption directly below the image. And you can choose to omit either of these things, either the figure number or the caption or both of them. Then we take a look at a few more hyperlinks. You'll see that they point back to page number 1 and 3. It also points forward as well. So just keep in mind that this also does forward referencing. Here's an example of a table. The tables are also numbered. They also have a caption. And then after this, similar to what we have in our table of contents, all of the equations, the tables, and the figures that we've numbered, they're added to the end of the document. And they also point back to those PDF links, like so. And at the very end of the document, we have our references. These are just some dummy references I've included. So you'll see that my table of contents is at the beginning. It also points to these extra lists of equations, figures, and tables that we've added to the end. So that's great. So first, let's take a look at how to compile your Groff document. And I want to get this out of the way in the beginning because I had a lot of problems compiling Groff when I first started using it. So I didn't know what options to use. And let's take a look at some of the options that you'd usually use to compile a normal Groff document. So We know that to convert directly into a PDF file, you need tpdf. Then I use the -u because I use PDF PIC to embed my images. If you're using PSPIC, that shouldn't be necessary. Then we have the options for table, T for table, E for equations, P for pick, GNU pick, and capital R for refer if you have bibliographies that you want to refer in your document. So one thing to note is that using capital R, that directly calls on your default database. So your default database should be found in user dict papers and if you don't have this file, you can probably create it. What I've done is I've made a link from that file to my bibliography document in my home folder. I don't know if this is safe, and if it is unsafe, do let me know so I can change my practices. But this is what I'm doing right now, so I can just run it all in one command. And then there's MSPDF. So the MSPDF option, that's a combination of the normal MS macros and the MPDF mark macros. Plus, I think it adds a little bit more functionality. And then there's obviously the name of the document you're compiling, and then out to the PDF file. This is more or less how you'd compile a Groff document. And I also want to talk about why I use a PDF PIC instead of a PSPIC. So here's an example document I brought up. To compile with PSPIC, you need to use a TPS option, and this is what most places on the internet ask you to do. They ask you to use PSPIC and use E for equations, let's say, then MS, then name of your file. That goes to a PS file, and then you've got to convert that PS file using PS to PDF, like so. So you've got your file. The only thing is it's got to be in an EPS format. What I don't like about this is that it gets rid of my hyperlinks or any PDF links that I use. And for the life of me, I don't know why I can't get that to work. Even if I use the MS PDF option, it's not a clickable link. So I end up using PDF PIC to embed images. Save that. So Groff, tpdf, mspdf, and straight to a PDF file. Oh, yeah, like I said, you gotta give the U option. I forgot for unsafe. But like I said, I haven't faced any issues so far, and I've been using it for months actually without any problems. So it works just about the same, except that instead of having your file as an EPS file, you need to convert it to PDF, and there's not much difference to it. Right, so let's take a look at some of the custom macros I've written to make my life a little easier with the Groff. The first one is called head, and that's just a replacement for numbered headings, the NH macro. It adds a little more functionality, such as automatically increasing the size of your headings, because by default, I feel like Groff's headings are really small. They're almost the same size as your normal text. So depending on the level of your heading, the size of the heading will change. So the first heading will be large, the second heading will be a little bit smaller, and if you have a third heading after this, that will be a little smaller than this, but still bigger than your normal text. Then we have the EQ macro. It's almost the same thing, except that I've made it automatically number the equations, and it increments that numbering with as you go through the document. The EN macro, that it adds names or captions, let's say, to your equations, and it saves all of that in an external file that gets called at the end of the document, and it prints this out. TE, that's the ending macro for tables, and that does the same thing as this. It gives names or captions to the tables, and saves it in an external file. I've written a macro for PDF PIC, which uses PDF PIC, and it does the same thing. It automatically numbers them, and it saves it in an external file. The other macro I've written is to output code. This is really trivial. All it does is changes the font, and it puts your text in a box. Yeah. All right. So let's take a look at this MS template that I've got here. Next, we have an option called no head numbering. What that does is, if you remember, the equations are numbered according to their heading. So since this is 2.1, the first one is called 2.1.1. If I don't want that, I can uncomment this or change this value to 1. And when I run that, you'll see that the equations, they're numbered 1, 2, 3. The same thing happens for the figures and the tables as well. So they're no longer numbered according to the heading or the section. Great. Next, I include my opening macros. I'll show you the opening and the closing macros at the end of the file, but just note that once you've called opening macros, you should call the closing macros as well, because these open a stream to write the names of these files. So you need to ensure that you close the IO stream when you're done processing this document. Here, I set the header and footer margins. By default, I think it's 1 inch. Now here is a very important piece of code. It moves the table of contents without using PDF-RAW. I don't use PDF-RAW because it's never worked properly for me. It always messes up my images, and it's throwing errors when I use the input and output streams in my opening and closing macros. So it's never worked for me. So I found, let's say, a hack to move my table of contents, but I admit it's not the best way to do this. So what this does is, at the end of the file, when you have the table of contents, it points that back to the beginning of the document. So that's processed here, and that's included here. And I'll show you that command when I get to the end. We have the .r1 and r2 macros, and these are options you include for your references. Like I said, I use accumulate, so my references accumulate at the end of the document. And this is just to put your reference numbers in square brackets. So like this, I find that a little more appealing, visually appealing, than just having number. Then we add headers. RH is for right header, CH for center header, CF for center footer. And if you want to put the page number in the footer, you've got to use the percentage. So my footer is hyphen percent, or the page number, and a hyphen again. And you can change the hyphens to whatever you want, or you can just have the percentage for your page number. Then I invoke a GNU pick. So that this command I use to draw the box I have here. You can fill it with gray using this fill command. You can also make it shaded using a color of your choice. So let's say I can shade it blue, I think. I think I gotta put that in brackets. So we've got blue. That's not very appealing, but you can change the colors like that. Then we have our first hyperlink. So hyperlinks are all PDF links. They're invoked using PDF href. The W here stands for web link, or the hyperlink. Hyphen D stands for the text, the URL that you want to put in there. And then whatever comes after the URL is the text that appears as the hyperlink. So welcome to Groff. Let me just compile this. So welcome to Groff. This is the text that I click on, and that you put after your hyperlink over here. And then here we have PDF PIC, which I've used to put in the GNU and the TOC images. I use the L and the R options to left and right align. So GNU is left and TOC is right aligned. Um, so the one limitation that I see with embedding pictures in Groff is that the images are usually put in right after the other. So if I didn't have this negative spacing, the pictures would be put in one after the other. Um, I still haven't found a way to make them appear side by side. And if you know a way to do that, please tell me, because I feel like that could be really useful. But for now, the only way I found to do this is use negative spacing and to pull the line back up. And it requires a little bit of trial and error. You got to play around with the values. You can specify I for inches with your spacing, and that'll pull up your images back up. Great. So these three lines, they manipulate the lines again. The \D is used to set the thickness of the lines I have in my document. And this is used to draw a horizontal line, and the 6.6i is the length of the line. And then I set the thickness of my line back to normal. Then we get to our document. We have the first heading. Um, so this can take two arguments. It can either take the level of the heading. It can be 1, 2, 3, whatever. If there's no number given, it's just going to assume it's level 1 heading, and it'll take the title of the heading, or whatever is in the text in the heading as well. And this here is how you manipulate font size and the vertical spacing. You can also use .ps to do that, but I don't know why. Sometimes it throws an error, sometimes it just doesn't work. So this is a surefire way to get it done, because this goes and edits the register. So registers are how Groff stores information. So the number register, NR. So this goes ahead and straight up changes the values stored in the registers. VS stands for vertical spacing. You can change that there. So now we take a look at our first PDF link, or PDF forward reference. So how PDF referencing inside a document works is you need to have a PDF mark first. So you can mark a place in your document with the M option, D, and then you give it a variable name. Let's say some variable name, and then you can also add some descriptive text to it, or you can also you can use the A option. The A stands for affix text, so text after this marked link. So after you've marked a place in the document, you can make a call to that place in the document using the L option. So L stands for link and M stands for mark. And then you got to use the same variable name and again descriptive text. So this calls a, no, this points to, so does that compile? Yeah. Where have I put that? Yeah, so this points to, I mean, so I put the mark right over here, so it's pointing to the same place, but this is how it works. Right now, this link is pointing to an image, and this marking is done up in the custom macros that I mentioned before. In the pick, the en, and the te, it adds a mark when you call those macros. Next, we have code. This is also pretty simple. You just put it between lowercase .b1 and .b2, and that should print it out in a box and with constant width font, or like monospace font. Here is how to use the pick command. So you can add first a 0 for no numbering. You can add an optional caption, then you put in the file path, the alignment, and the size. I think the size you can also include as inches. So the first one, this is the default behavior of the pick macro. So it has a caption, it has a file path. alignment and size. So these three are non-negotiable. You have to have the last three arguments. The caption is optional, and if you add a 0 in the beginning, that'll tell it not to number it. So you'll see that the second image here is not numbered, and if you don't include a caption, it's just going to automatically add a figure number. You can tell it not to add a figure number with 0 and no caption, like that. So equations work pretty much the same way as the pick macro. Um, so EQ can take on one command, which is the 0 option. So if you recall what I said, that EQ now automatically numbers the equations. And if I don't want it to number my equation, I can give it 0. And that will remove the numbering from my equation. So this was numbered before, now it's not numbered anymore. So if you remove that, the numbering is back. And that's pretty much it for the EQ macro. The EN macro does a little bit more. For one, it adds a caption to your equation. Now the caption isn't displayed anywhere near the equation. However, the caption is displayed at the end in this table of contents, so a linear equation, along with the equation number. The EN macro also accepts a 0 argument. What this does is it tells it not to add this equation to the table of contents. For example, this is a continuation of this long series, and that's put in two separate equations. And I want this second one to show up in the same place as the first one. I don't want this to be a separate entry. So if I don't want a separate entry, I can add 0 to the en macro. If I so maybe I'll show you the default behavior. The default behavior, it just says a long mathematical series. That's both of those. But if I get rid of that, it's gonna register that second one as a separate equation, and sometimes we don't want that. In this last section here, we have a couple more PDF links, and I think I've mostly covered how to do PDF links. And just note that you got to get this name exactly right. If this name is wrong, it's not going to point to the PDF mark that you've placed in your document. These macros right here, you can use them if you want the list of equations or tables at the end of your document. So if you don't have this, by default, it won't display any of that stuff. You won't have the tables, anything, right? This is useful because sometimes not all documents have figures, not all documents have tables. So you can just invoke what you require. So suppose you just need equations and figures and no tables. So it's just going to add the figures and the tables, sorry, figures and the equations to the end of your document. So these last few lines that I've commented out over here, these are the lines that relocate the table of contents. The DS, CH, and CF, these are just to tell it to have empty headers and footers because I don't want a page number on my table of contents. And this line over here, it basically moves everything we have after this back up to, where was that? Yes, back up to here. Now, this isn't obviously the most elegant way to do it, but like I said, I faced a lot of issues with PDF Groff, and for now, this is the best way I've found. I may change my ways later, but I'm just happy because I have a table of contents, and on the sidebar over here, I can still click on stuff, and that takes me to different places in my document. So I don't use this at the end of the document usually because it interferes with refer. So it takes the references to the beginning of the document as well, because by default I accumulate the references that end up at the end of the document. So I don't want both my table of contents and the references in the beginning. So What I do is I take these out of the document and I've got to add them back manually. So this again I consider a little bit hacky, maybe not the best way to do it, but for now this is working. So I manually process this file using refer into a temporary MS document, and then I echo or I append um, the lines to move the table of contents to this temporary file, and then I compile that temporary file using Groff, and that becomes then I remove the temporary file, but in the end I end up with this with my table of contents over here. Again, maybe probably not the best way to do it. It's a very hacky way to do it. Um, but for now, this is what works for me, and PDF RAW is just not looking viable. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe PDF RAW doesn't play nice with the streams, because I've read that PDF RAW processes the file uh, up to 2 to 4 times, and that's probably messing up with my macros that open and close streams. Alright, so that's gonna be it for this video. I think this one has already gone on for way too long. Next time we'll take a look at my macros, what I've written to do the automatic counting and the PDF marks. We'll also take a look at some of the drawings that you can do using pick and how that could benefit someone in the technical fields. And I'll walk you guys through that the next time. So thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments if you have any feedback or suggestions. So maybe I can improve how I use Groff, or maybe fix some of the mistakes that I've been making. Yeah, until next time.